So does it, will it pay? Is it going to be cost effective to do this?
The costs will vary between £4 to £8 per hectare, depending on what system you use, over your sort of typical 500 hectare farm. And the benefits recorded will be, what we've got here is benefits recorded as yield. So you should get a minimum of about a 2% average yield increase. Okay, now that's based on farm experience and on trials, HGCA trials and so on. And that's going to look at, in wheat and rape, on fields that are quite variable, yeah, that's going to give you about a £15 to £20 a hectare increase in margin. Some of your fields might not be quite as variable, so you're not going to get as big a response over doing it as a flat rate. So there you're looking at about £10 a hectare average, taking into account your if you do your variable and your non-variable fields, both with variable nitrogen. So you're going to get a net benefit there. Again, you're also going to get associated benefits with not having a more even crop. So again, you should have less lodging by not over-applying on thicker areas, and again, disease pressure and so on will should lead to more efficient or less fungicide use.
So again, it's just about being smarter, using N in a smarter way. So that's okay. That's my nitrogen. What about P and K? What's the best thing to do with that?
What are you doing with your P and K at the moment?
Just doing a W sample at the moment. Haven't done some for a while. I'm looking to do the fields again, but I'm not quite sure whether W is right for me and whether I should be looking at something else.
Okay. What I've done here is I've superimposed a W pattern on top of a field which I've already mapped, so I've looked at intensively and taken lots of nutrient samples in there. And there's a couple of things we need to look at there. The average. This W pattern will give us a field average index of about 2, okay? Which is about, you know, great, that's where you think you want to be. Maintenance application, just carry on, no problem. What you can see from this map, if you look at underline the W pattern, is that we've got a range of variation which that average figure is hiding. So in the top of the very top of the map there, we've got some yellow and orange areas which are about an index 1, you can see on the scale. And that passes through some dark green areas and then onto blue areas. So we've actually got a range of variation across each leg of that W of about 1 to 3, index 1 to index 3. In other words, areas which are deficient and areas which are excessive, whereas the average, you think everything was just about right. We've also got an area which we haven't even touched with that W. So that dark blue area right in the middle there, we've actually completely missed that by doing the W pattern, and that's potentially an area which you would want to know about in terms of both reducing fertiliser usage and you know, avoiding any over-application and potential environmental problems there.
Okay, so what can I do better than the W sample?
Well, you've already got some information saying about where your fields might vary. You could use your yield maps to initially target a few sample points, or maybe if you've got a conductivity map or a soil survey map, and that might give you an idea of how much range of variation you might have on the field. Or you could do a more systematic approach and sample the whole field with a grid type of system.
Right, yeah. So what do you mean by a grid system? How does that work?
Well, essentially, it's an unbiased recording of the soil nutrient status across the whole field. So you can see here that each part of the field is sampled equally. Each one of those black dots there is a sample location, and at each one of those points you would go and take a single sample, which would consist of normally 16 cores around each one of those black dots, bolts into one bag, yeah, and that would be a soil sample from that particular location. That would be georeferenced, analysed at the lab, and then you'd have some nutrient information for each part of the field, each one of those dots, rather than a single bit of information, an average for the whole field. So
do I just get one piece of information back, or can I get more pieces of information back from this sampling?
Well, I showed you the potassium map. Yeah. Typically, you would also have what we call a standard analysis, so that would be for phosphorus, magnesium and pH. If you're growing a particular crop or a particular soil type where you thought you might have a trace element deficiency, then you could also add additional analysis as you saw appropriate.
Yeah. So will I see a difference between P and K from that?
Well, we've seen the K map. We'll also see the P map here. Again, you've got a big bit of variation here between, and the range of variation is about the same. It's between an index 1 area which is deficient. If you put a maintenance application on there, you'd actually be underapplying and potentially might be losing yield, all the way up to an index 4 in this case, where again you'd be wasting fertiliser if you put a maintenance application on there. So you've got the same range of variation with your P and your K, but if you think back to the K map there, where it varies is actually different. Okay, so it's a justification for looking at the two nutrients separately and managing them separately.
So it's okay having this information there, but what do I do with it now? How do I make better use of it?
Well, as I said, the yellow areas we need to think about. A maintenance application wouldn't be enough there. We want to actually make sure we can build those nutrients up to a point which is not yield limiting, so we need to apply more on those areas and in the short term give the crop what it needs to reach its yield potential, and in the long term build up the indices. In all those dark blue areas you can see there, we actually want to reduce the fertiliser usage. So what we need to do is take that soil nutrient information, what the soil is actually going to provide to the crop. Plus, we could look at your yield maps and also say, well, we not only know what the soil is going to provide to the crop, but we might actually be able to look at your yield maps and say, we might be able to say variably across the field how much your crops are actually removing in P and K as well. So we could use the nutrient map on its own, or we could use the offtake map and the nutrient map to actually come up with a more fine-tuned and a more precise application map, which you can see there. The red areas are areas where we're getting increasing rates of nitrogen, but there's quite a bit of a field where we're not, beg your pardon, phosphorus, but there's quite a bit of a field where we're putting very little or not much on at all.
Right, so I guess if I'm doing this, it's going to cost me a lot more than doing my W sampling. Is it going to be worth it?
Yeah, it's going to. You're collecting a lot more information, so you'd expect it to have a cost to that. If we take the costs over 4 years, okay, you're not going to need to do your P and K sampling every year. You might need to monitor your crop every year for the nitrogen requirement, but you only need to look at your P and K every 4 years. So we spread the costs over 4 years, and they would end up at being between £5 and £5.50 a hectare for a grid sampling approach, based on one sample per hectare. Each sample will be made of 16 sub-samples. So for the grid sampling in the application map, £5 to £5.50 a hectare. And then you're looking at, there's a range of kit available out there, but you're looking at about £1 a hectare to get set up for your variable rate application kit, depending on what your current circumstances are. You may take a bit of a less intensive approach to if you've got information which can target sample, which might slightly reduce your sampling costs. Well, those are the costs you're looking at. The benefits, as we've touched upon, they're going to come in two ways: either identifying low areas where we're going to get a yield benefit, or identifying areas where we can cut back on fertiliser, and you're looking at about £15 a hectare on a field which has got a bit of variation. So I think it's fair to say that if you've got some muck been going on and so on, and different soil types, you might have a variation between 1 and 3 on each field. This is the sort of benefits that you're likely to end up with.
So really, I've got to get it sampled to know what my baseline level is before I start working out what I want to do next. So
you can make some deductions about your field from your own knowledge, but essentially, if you want to know what's going on, you do need to go out there and sample it. Yeah.
Okay. So, right, so that's the fertiliser side of things. What about chemicals? How does that work?
Okay, well, we mentioned PGRs before, and you could also think about applying that to fungicides as well with your canopy maps and so on. Again, it might be a bit of a moot question, but at least you can consider, can I reduce fungicide rates in the thicker areas of the field based on my canopy maps? But one area we haven't looked at is weeds. So. How are you for weeds? Have you got any sort of patchy weeds on the farm? Or?
I've got a few, yes, unfortunately. Noticed from my yield map.
We can see what effect they're having on yields, but you've only circled one part of the field, so presumably they are occurring in patches rather than
That's a very good question. I probably haven't recorded them as good as well as I possibly could, and maybe that I should be doing more. So how do I record where the weeds are before I get to that stage?
Well, the most common way of weed tagging, of recording the location of weeds, is in the combine with weed tagging. Most, if not all, of the yield mapping system in the combines will have some sort of weed tagging available, which will just simply be a button in the cab, which when you see a weed, as you're combining, you press it, and it'll actually record where that weed is on a card in the combine, which you can then view on a bit of software afterwards. Similarly, a lot of the GPS boxes in your sprayer, if you've got guidance or some sort of boom control or whatever on your sprayer, you'll probably find that they've got a tagging option as well. On foot, you could have look at your agronomist. He might have a handheld GPS type of equipment, or you can go out yourself scouting with an ATV, and you can actually just record on a small PDA, a small handheld computer, where those weeds are actually occurring, and build up a picture over a number of years so that you can see, are weeds occurring always in the same patches, or are they moving around the farm?
Yeah, I think it's interesting you mentioned about combines, because I think I do have that mechanism on the console, but not really quite sure how to use it, so I'm going to get the operator's manual out. But if I did that, what would it look like? What sort of information would I get?
Okay, well, this is a map we've made of weed populations, and you can see that we've got the middle third of a field here, which is fairly heavily infested with weeds. Yeah. But the top and the bottom of the field, we've got no weeds at all there. Now, and this has been recorded over a period of time. So the next question naturally comes into our heads is, can we get away with only spraying the area of the field which has got the weed infestation, and not spray to the north and the south of the field where we've got, to all intents and purposes, below threshold populations for applying herbicide. So we've got options there. We could either do a full rate and on-off, so we could just turn on as we go through that middle patch and turn off on the north and the south, or we could think about other strategies like, do we do a full rate in the highly infested patch, and then half rate maybe in the areas where we haven't actually spotted any weeds over the season or seasons.
So that's all very well and good, but will it pay me to take this type of approach?
Well, there's a number of sort of barriers that you've got to overcome, both practical and psychological, in terms of how much of a risk you perceive this to be in terms of your weed management. Most of the sort of weeds that might be more suited to patch spraying, in other words, the ones that are likely to occur more in patches, cleavers, wild oats and blackgrass, for example, are also the ones that can be quite invasive, quite damaging to your yield as well. So you may want to, you may not think that an on-off type of policy, which is potentially the one where you're going to get the highest savings, is suitable there. You may think, well, I in the areas where, okay, I haven't actually mapped any weeds, I really still want to put on a half rate just in case. There's also, we might want to think about putting a buffer zone around some of those areas, because seeds can get dragged out by cultivations and by combining and so on. So those patches might actually be a bit bigger, or become a bit bigger than we have actually recorded. So a spray, no spray approach might not be sustainable, but a full rate, half rate, although giving you potentially less savings, might be, a more lower risk approach to it. But studies that have been done and practical applications have shown that we could actually, after taking into account our costs, which is both for the tagging equipment and the patch spraying, which we're going to look at about £7 a hectare, there's a benefit of about £5 to £10 a hectare there on a largish farm, a largish cereal farm. And again, you've got to have a variation there. So with patchy weeds, and by patchy weeds we mean between, if you've got less than 60 to 70% of a field covered with weeds, then you should have a potential to actually do some sort of variable application. The actual equipment, again, the costs may vary depending on whether you go for a full direct injection system, whereby you can separately control each chemical or not. So there's a few things to think about there.
Yeah, well, I'm only a sort of 500 hectare farm, so I'll probably leave that one till later. But you show me a lot of information here. How do I know whether it's going to work or not?